Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today? Thank you so much for being here. I see we have about 295 participants as of now, so we would like to wait maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then we're going to resume. Okay, so it's 1:02 p.m. We would like to be respectful to everybody's time, so I'm gonna start it. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to My Turn, Your Turn, Building on Quality of Feedback in the Pre-K Classroom webinar. This is the second training in the second series in instructional support for class. We are thrilled to be here today with you. And on behalf of Early Learning Coalition and our educational team, thank you for all joining us today. And thank you all who participated in our previous webinars. This is the webinar and it's being recorded like any other webinars, and you will have access to it on the ELC website. So if you have any technical difficulties, you will be able to watch it at a later time. So having said that, let's begin, shall we? We would like to start out by introducing ourselves. My name is Agnieszka Bodie, and I am Quality and Education Coaching Specialist for the Early Learning Coalition of Broward County. We have the pleasure of working with various providers throughout the Broward County, and at this moment, I am supporting the directors and teachers in implementation of teaching strategies called CHAT assessment. And my wonderful co-presenter is my coworker, Deborah. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deborah Cruz. I'm also a quality and education coaching specialist here at the ELC of Broward.
Okay, so next let's go over some webinar housekeeping. And as you can see on your right side, you see the orange sign with a little arrow in it. So when you click on that, the panel will either open or close. When you click on the question triangle shown below on the panel, you can type any questions or comments throughout the training. To download the handouts, click on the handouts triangle shown below on the panel, all the way in the bottom. Your certificate will be emailed to you after the training. Click on the document in the handouts section to access the handouts and download it to your computer. Once you click on the document, the PDF will open up, which will allow you to click on the down arrow to download the document to your own device. Okay, so I wanted to go over the training. What are we going to do today? We're going to go over some of the objectives for today's training. What is it for me? What are you as a preschool professional will gain from this training? What's in it for the children? How will the children benefit and what would be their outcomes. We will also review all the 3 class domains, just as a reminder. We will learn what is quality of feedback, which we're going to dig deeper today. That's the goal for this webinar. You will learn about all the 5 quality of feedback indicators, which are scaffolding, feedback loops, prompting through processes, thought processes, providing information, encouragement, and affirmation. Okay, let's move on. So I wanted to start with our training objective. Some of the things we will do is we'll learn about strategies for providing effective feedback that helps teachers create learning opportunities and provide meaningful feedback to children throughout the day using hints and assistant, which is scaffolding, back and forth exchanges, and follow-up questions, which is feedback loops, asking children to explain their thinking, which is prompting through processes, thought processes, clarify and expand, providing information, and offering praise that will increase children's involvement and persistence, encouragement, and affirmation. So, what is it for you here? At times, we ask ourselves why I am doing this, why I'm here, what's in it for me? Teachers provide quality of feedback when they scaffold a task or understanding, engage in extended feedback loops from children's thought processes, provide information, and encourage and affirm children's effort, all in ways they push children learning and encourage their persistence so they reach a deeper level of understanding. So you can make the most of your time with children at every time of the day by intentionally looking for every occasion to provide meaningful feedback, create more learning opportunities, respond to what you see children say and do, and give specific praise for their effort. What's in it for children? With effective feedback, children can explain what they thought or did, something as they persist a task or challenges they otherwise could not complete while increasing their understanding. With our effective feedback, they will strive in their daily activities and learning. So you might remember from the previous webinars, but let's just remind ourselves a little bit what CLASS is. CLASS is an acronym that stands for Classroom Assessment Scoring System. It is an observational tool used to measure the effectiveness of classroom interaction between teachers and children to children. There is a CLASS tool for infants, toddler and pre-K classrooms, as well as for older age ranges. CLASS is being used in the state of Florida across early childhood program to help support teacher practice, which has an impact on child outcomes. CLASS was developed to make teacher-child interactions objective and measurable. It is based on many years of studies, publications, and replication across different classrooms. The research that the CLASS is based on verifies that the interactions measured by the CLASS tool make a real difference in children's learning and development. This is an observation that occurs for about 2 hours in the classroom, and the teachers use their individualized report to reflect on their teaching practices. As you can see in the next slide, this chart on this chart for pre-K class has 3 domains. The first one is emotional support, then classroom organization, and lastly instructional support. Each domain has their own dimensions. Emotional support consists of positive climate, negative climate, teacher sensitivity, and regards for student perspective. Classroom organization has behavior management, productivity, and instructional learning format. And instructional support dimension have concept development, quality of feedback, and language modeling. In the previous series of webinars, in this series article that went over the last series, this series we're going to talk about instructional support, and today we're going to dig deeper in quality of feedback dimension. So like I mentioned in the last slide, there are 3 dimensions in the instructional support. Concept development, which our coworkers Tiffany and Amy did a wonderful job last week with. Quality of feedback, which we will dig deeper today. And language modeling, which you'll learn more about next week from our colleagues Julio and Reina. Going forward, like I said, just a second ago, our focus is on this dimension of quality of feedback, and it's how teachers extend student learning through the responses to students' ideas, comments, and work. Interactions between teachers and children are the key for instructional support. This domain does not focus on the content of curriculum or learning activities, but rather on the ways in which teachers implement whichever curriculum they are using to effectively support cognitive and language development. So, is it time for our first poll? So right now, I would love to ask you to reflect on, is your feedback to children in your classroom often more than just good job? So we're going to show you some options, and the options are yes, always, sometimes, I need to work on that. Is your feedback often more than just good job? Yes, always, sometimes, I need to work on it. So we're going to give you a few minutes so you can vote. I see 62% of you voted. Okay, we're getting there. I can see all the percentage of who voted. We're 60%, more than that. Okay. I'm gonna give another minute or so. Don't worry, guys, there's no wrong answers. This is just a poll so we can interact with each other in this quarantine time. Okay, I see we stopped at 67%. Oh, no, we're going up 68%. Okay, so we're going to close the poll because we would like to be respectful with your time. So let's see what you guys think. Okay, so 61% said that more often than just good job, you say a little bit more than good job. Okay, wow, that's awesome. So, what this might be tricky sometimes because many of us have difficulty doing, saying something more than only good job, because actual quality feedback takes time. So it's not only like a good job or nice work. It should be intentional. It means starting sentences with like, I like the way. But if we are aware that the feedback can be stronger and we can improve, we can work on that and until it becomes more mature during the day and activities. So just by practicing saying just more than good job, like I like the way you did that, and explain what the child did correctly. And thank you so much for sharing and being honest. So let's move on. So what is quality of feedback about? Well, quality of feedback describe how teachers respond to children's effort in ways that expand their knowledge and encourage their participation. And quality of feedback, as a result, refers also to how might the children experience of frequently receiving feedback that support their understanding and persistent affect their development. They might build the confidence by that, be more motivated to try new things, be more likely to persist when faced with challenges, and be exposed to more learning opportunities which can help them develop in all areas. I think we have a little delay here with the slide. If that happened, please bear with us, guys, because the webinar platform have sometimes glitches and we have some delays with switching slides. So please bear with us. So let's move on. So what's the difference between quality of feedback and concept development? Because sometimes it's very confusing. Quality of feedback is a complex dimension. Often teachers are unsure about what counts as a feedback when we talk about this dimension. It can also be confused with concept development. Put simply, quality of feedback includes the way teachers respond to children in order to expand learning or participation. So quality of feedback always happens in response to something a child says or does. Some teachers think that teacher talk always counts as a feedback. So sometimes children say something and the teacher might just acknowledge that they heard that the child said something, but that's not quality of feedback. It's the teacher's response pushing that child's understanding and helping the child comes to the correct answer. Is that happening? If not, then that's not quality of feedback. It's just a comment that the teacher has made. There's real internationality in the quality of feedback, and that the teacher is really engaged in back and forth exchanges with the children to help them with their understanding or to arrive at the correct answer. So again, to summarize, quality feedback refers to how teachers respond to children in order to expand learning or participation, and concept development refers to how teachers facilitate children's broader understanding of concepts and ideas. So why is quality of feedback so challenging? So we're going to have another poll coming up. Why is quality of feedback so challenging? So again, please take a moment and reflect on why is quality feedback so challenging for you. And we're going to pull up some choices. It's hard for me to give student hints. Follow-up questions are difficult for me. I do not ask my students to explain their thinking. I find it hard to expand on my students' responses. I say, good job, too much. So take a moment, cast your vote. Thank you for voting. We're at 20%. Okay, we're at 40%. %. We'll do one more minute. Okay, 60, almost 60%. Keep coming, guys. Keep coming with those answers. Thank you. Okay, so we stop on 64%. So let's see what are some of those responses we got. So we are keep moving and being respectful with your time. Oh, something moved. Okay, so let's see the percentages for all. Okay, so 46%, which is the most, said that you think you said good job too much. So we're gonna have to work on giving the children more recognitions with reinforcement, and the children stay on the task. So we're gonna have to work on that area. 18% of you said I find it hard to expand on my students' respond. So you should work on giving more specific feedback and expand and clarify what you were talking to children about, and that's what we're going to talk about throughout the webinar today. 13% said I do not ask my student to explain their thinking. So you might want to ask the children more often to explain what their way thinking and how did they came up with this idea. Okay, well, thank you so much, guys, for voting and for sharing with us and for being honest. And like I said, we're going to go over all this throughout the whole webinar today. So next, my wonderful coworker will take over.
Okay, so just trying to move on to the next slide after we got the results from the poll. And now before you, you should see a slide, and we kind of just want you all to think about the statements that you see before you. And if you're a teacher, imagine that your director or owner are sharing these statements with you. In the question box, we want you to just take that opportunity and think about how that would make you feel to hear these statements. And if you're a director or an owner, think about what type of feedback you give to your own staff. Does it sound familiar? Is it something that maybe you feel that you need to work on yourself? So, and just in case we have anyone that might not be able to see the slide or is listening in on the phone, the statements before you say, the way you presented your lesson to the students today was so interesting. They seem to really love the activity. Second statement says, I know these last few months have been challenging, but thank you for stepping up and assisting your fellow teachers and students. It would not have been the same without you here. The next statement, it has been a pleasure working with you this year. You're extremely professional, kind to others, and love what you do. And the last one says, your classroom is so organized. It looks like you really put a lot of thought into your layout, and it seems like a place any child would love. So think about those statements and really kind of just question, how does that make you feel? How would you feel to hear those statements said to you? And you can feel free to share any of those in the question box below. So some of the feedback that we're getting is that you feel appreciated and validated, encouragement. It's also encouraging good behaviors. Someone said it would be nice because you wouldn't be expecting this type of feedback. You feel worth it, motivated, encouraged. A lot of motivated and encouragement I see here. Special, important, empowered. So these are all incredibly powerful and encouraging statements that we are hearing here. And just think about it just as our students. We like hearing these positive forms of affirmation. So qualitative feedback, it really has to be deliberate and intentional. And we need to be very specific with our feedback. Like I said, just like our students, we want to hear this positive praise. And we want to take more pride and feel motivated in our work. So thank you for sharing. And now if you look at the slide before you, it's a great image. But when you compare it to the slide that we just read with the 4 different statements, what are your thoughts now? Granted, again, this might be a great image to see, but good job. It's not very intentional or individualized. So for some people, even good job might just seem like an empty praise, right? So just like our students, when we crave those positive comments, like good job, but we really appreciate it so much more when it's individualized and specific to us. And oh, yep, and someone says it's like robots or it's too generic, right? When we hear good job, great job, excellent, this isn't individualized. This doesn't really tell us what we're doing that's so great. We want to hear, more individualized feedback. We want to know exactly what we're doing that's such a good job. So in this slide before you, we have quality of feedback, and what does it look like? So this is a visual representation of quality of feedback. And so on the left-hand side, first we see scaffolding. And scaffolding consists of assistance and hints that we give our students. Then we move over to feedback loops. And it's simply just those constant back and forth exchanges between the student and the adult. We move over to prompting thought processes. And those are those higher level thinking questions. Those are the ones that encourage students to really think about their responses. Those how, why questions. Then we have providing information. And this is the way in which we clarify and further explain to our students. We give them more information. And then lastly, we have our encouragement and affirmation, which is kind of what we've been going over in the last few slides too. And it's that particular praise and recognition that we give our students to increase their involvement. So what are some of the key points for quality of feedback? We want to make sure that we're expanding learning and encouraging participation. So we can describe quality of feedback as those learning conversations. We want to make sure it's being constant back and forth exchanges, and that those conversations ensure students understand what the teacher is actually teaching. So everything we say is in response to children. It can be an opportunity to help them understand something better and persist in further. So with quality of feedback, it's about taking those opportunities and responding in a particular way. We want to make sure that we're just not giving that information, but it's being comprehended as well. Also, is it intentional and in the moment? Is it providing information in response to the child? Is it engaging the child? Quality feedback helps students reach a deeper understanding of concepts. And the whole focus really is the process of learning rather than just simply getting the answer correct. So when we talk about scaffolding, it's really when we give hints or assistance. And that's our first indicator. Scaffolding happens when a teacher acknowledges where a student is starting and provides the appropriate level of support in order to help the child. So knowing your students is really important and forming that relationship with them. This way you can better understand their needs. So an example of scaffolding can be if a child is having a hard time stringing beads and the teacher holds the beads for them. Then that teacher is scaffolding because they're helping that child complete that task without actually doing it for them. And it's not only about offering support for a child to complete a task, but it could also be about providing problem-solving questions and giving choices. So what might it look like? So think about you're in your classroom and you have a child who is becoming frustrated and really withdrawn. This may be an opportunity for you as an educator to step in and offer guidance or clues for that child. You may explain them the steps or even model how the child can complete the activity. Practicing cutting is a task that many students struggle with. So as a teacher, you may offer support to help a child complete a task, like we see in the image below. The teacher may offer that physical support by holding the paper for the child so that they're still capable of completing that task on their own. Hints and assistance can be given verbally. It can be done also with pictures or gestures. So another example of scaffolding is right here. We see that there are a group of students and a teacher. And while playing a board game, a child struggles to name the animal on her card. So the following exchange takes place. And during this exchange, I'm going to actually ask Agnes to help me demonstrate a conversation that might happen between the child and the teacher. Okay, Agnes, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So I begin as the teacher and I state, well, this animal, it flies and it makes a hooting sound.
And me as a child, it's owl.
That's right. It is an owl. Let's say it together. It's an
An
owl.
owl.
So with that statement, the teacher really could have just simply pointed to the owl or said the animal for the student. But instead, she gave the child some hints or clues that allows them to come to the decision on their own with just a little bit of assistance. Okay, so we have this game set for you and it's called Name That Behavior Marker. So right now we just went over scaffolding and we said again that the two components of scaffolding is either hints or it is assistance. So now we want you to get the opportunity to identify the components. So as I read the slide, I want you to think about which sentence is an example of a hint and which sentence is an example of assistance. You can just think about it, or if you want, you can feel free to write it in the question box below. Okay, so while completing a puzzle, Sarah struggles with finding a missing piece. Ms. Suarez states, since it's part of the sun, what color could it be? So think about that to yourself right now. Do you think that's more of an example of a hint, or is it more of an example of assistance? Okay, and I have some people who are writing in the question marks, and it seems that many of you are right on the money with that. But before, and yes, and someone said, could it be an example of both? And sometimes those hint and assistance, they can fall in between both. And what I'm going to do now is I'll put the other example. Exactly. Those people who did say hints, because she's more of giving a clue with this example. And that's why it leans more towards a hint. And the second statement says, Sarah is having difficulty holding a pencil to write her name. Ms. Suarez offers hand-over-hand support to help her. Now, do you think this is another example of a hint, or could it be an example of assistance? Okay, and I thank you all for answering in the question box. This one would be more closely related to assistance. Here, remember that we said with assistance, sometimes it can be that physical help. And with that hand over hand help or assistance, that is what she's able to do. It's a bit different than hints where you're giving more of clues or suggestions to get that example. Okay, so once again, we have a poll for you. And the statement says, what did the teacher do to demonstrate evidence of scaffolding in the board game scenario? So that was the scenario we saw just 2 slides ago. And what I'm going to do now is give you all that poll. And give you all an opportunity to answer that. So what did the teacher do? Did the teacher provide hints by saying it makes a hooting sound? Did the teacher recognize the children's efforts by saying, good job? Or did the teacher give the child a prize? So remember, it was just the scenario that we just went over 2 slides ago about the child struggling to name the animal on her card. And we'll give another about maybe 20 seconds or so to get some other people the opportunity to vote. Awesome. All right, we're about 70% or so. All right, so I'll wait another 10 seconds and then I'll close the poll and we'll be able to see the results on the screen together. Okay, so now we are sharing the results, and 72% of you were absolutely correct in that the teacher, remember, she said to the student, it makes a hooting sound. And that was how the student was able to guess that the animal she had before her was an owl. So it was that the teacher made the hooting sound. All right, so we'll go right back to the slideshow and we'll move on to quality feedback, and we're going to take a look at feedback loops. So feedback loops are those back and forth exchanges. It's the persistent by teacher, and it's those follow-up questions. When we talk about feedback loops, we're talking about that back and forth exchange where the teacher persists in sustaining the discussion through follow-up questions. So to help you think about this indicator better, we came up with the idea of a ping pong match, right? Because it's that constant back and forth. Rather than just dropping the ball after the child returns it, the teacher brings it back to the child. And then the child brings it back to the teacher. And then it's so forth and so forth, that constant exchange. So the teacher persists in sustaining this discussion, and the goal is to expand the child's learning and their thinking. Okay, so when responding to children, what we want you to really think about is, what does it promote? Are these open-ended questions? Is there a why or a how to the answer? So how do you know that? Why do you think that? Is it something that can be explained? You can tell students, well, tell me more. Describe to me when, or give me an example of. So it needs to be some of those higher level thinking questions. And the chart before you just kind of shows a graph of how you can begin those sentence structures to make sure that you're really pushing that child to give you a deeper understanding. So what does feedback loops look like in the classroom? Again, we stated that they were the back and forth exchanges between a teacher and a child, and that it increases a child's understanding of a topic or a performance. In classroom where there's really strong feedback loops, the teachers tend to engage in back and forth exchanges with children. They also persist in trying to get children to understand rather than stopping at just one or two comments. They want more information from that child, actual conversation going on. And they ask many follow-up questions to facilitate a higher level of understanding or performance. The teacher wants to be sure that the child is comprehending the information being presented. So in order for a feedback loop to occur, the exchange needs to focus on helping the child either gain a greater understanding of something or to perform a skill correctly. So what's an example of a feedback loop? Again, right now, I'm going to have Agnes join me, and we're going to demonstrate a conversation between a teacher and a child so you can all have a better understanding. And so it starts that it's a cold and rainy day, and a child asks the teacher why they're not going outside to play. So this following exchange takes place.
Why do we have to stay inside?
Well, why do you think we have to stay in?
I don't know.
Well, let's take a look out the window and tell me, what do you see?
Rain?
Okay, so what would happen if we went outside?
We got wet.
Yes, we would get wet. And how would that make us feel?
Yucky.
That's right. We would feel so yucky because our clothes would be wet from the rain, and then we would just be so uncomfortable. And that's why we have to stay inside so that we can stay dry. Notice that during that conversation, many times the student would only respond with one word answers. The teacher really needed to drive that conversation and continue asking questions to receive feedback from her student. So we know that some of our own students will need us to really give them that extra push in order to keep that consistent dialogue. Okay, so we are back to name that behavior marker. And again, we're going through, feedback loops. And with feedback loops, it comes in three major components, three behavior markers. And that is, are they follow-up questions? Is it persistent by the teacher, or is it back and forth exchanges? So with the first section, it says, Jalen, look, the boy fell off the slide. And Miss Lee said, what happened? And Jalen responded, he hit his head. He has to go to the doctor. Miss Lee responds, oh no, will the doctor be able to help him?
Is that your phone or my phone?
I think that we have, sorry about that. And so what do we think that is? Do we think it is follow-up questions, persistence by teacher, or is it perhaps back and forth exchanges? Okay. And with that response there, and this one is definitely really tricky. We we would consider this more of follow-up questions, but it definitely can be back and forth exchanges. Just think about, though, with our back and forth exchanges, we want it to be a little bit more continuous. So right here, there's just 2 responses. We want it to be a bit longer for it to be considered a complete feedback loop. With the second statement, it says, yes, but he'll need stitches. And Miss Lee responds, will it hurt? Only for a little bit, but then he'll be okay. And Miss Lee responds, well, will you draw what those stitches would look like? So here, could it still be persistence by teacher, or is it back and forth exchanges? And like what we said about feedback loops, this is also tends to be a little bit tricky because sometimes they do fall within each other and they're a bit interchangeable. So yes, it would be considered, someone said, I think it's both. Yeah, it would be under back and forth exchanges as well. But it is definitely part of persistence by teacher, right? She's really questioning the child and telling, what would it look like? Will you draw those stitches for me? And what would that look like? And at the very end, this whole conversation is back and forth exchanges. And like we said, and I hear a lot of people are saying both. Yes, like I mentioned again, with feedback loops, it's a little bit tricky because they can be interchangeable. And if it's a consistent conversation, you'll see that it falls under multiple ones at a time. So thank you all for responding and answering in the question box. So as we move forward, we have another poll for you to take. And this one says, what type of sport can we relate the conversations in feedback loops? So I'm going to pull up our poll. All right, and there are 3 choices here. You have, is it an example of ping pong? Does feedback loop looks like baseball, or does it look like a game of golf? Remember that feedback loop should be constant. One person says something, the other person says something. Back and forth. So what sport that's listed here is a sport that's like that? That maybe two people are playing and it's consistent. So we're going to give you all opportunity to get a chance to vote. We already have about half of you that voted in. Okay. I'll give you another maybe 10 seconds or so. Remember, feedback loops is that back and forth exchange. So what sport here looks like that? All right. And we're sharing the results, and 83% of you were right on the money. You said it was ping pong. Not sure why 14% thought it could be a game of baseball. Maybe you are missing the season, not sure. But remember, it's that back and forth exchange. So one person says something, the other person says something. Just like a game of ping pong or tennis, it's consistent. And usually it's between two people. So thank you for that. Okay. And we're just going to move along. And now we look at quality of feedback, and we're looking at prompting thought process. So it's when you ask children to explain their thinking. You question children about their actions and their responses. So when you think of this indicator, think of it as an opportunity for children to think out loud. An example of prompting thought processes would be a teacher introducing a new book during story time. So when she does this, she can show the children the cover of the book, and then she might ask, what do you think this book is going to be about? Then the teacher can intentionally build up on the children's responses. She can ask them to explain their thinking or to ask follow-up questions, just so that she can dig a bit deeper and provide that information throughout. Okay. So now we're going to look at some examples of different kinds of dialogues that can take place in your own classroom. In the first one, we see the teacher asks the question, is it sunny or cloudy? And a child responds with sunny. So if the teacher would just to say, you're right, it would not be considered effective feedback. It would be considered ineffective because the teacher's not really giving much information to that child. She's not prolonging this conversation. Instead, what would be a more appropriate statement would be for her to say, how do you know? How do you know it's sunny? What makes you think that it's sunny? With her just changing that, now it has that child explain their thinking. Then we look at the second statement, and it says a child states, look at my painting. And a teacher will respond, wow, you use a lot of red. Now that would be ineffective feedback because although that might be correct, the child might have used a lot of red paint. That doesn't really have the child explain their artwork. So instead, what the teacher might respond is, well, tell me about the colors that you use. And this gets the child thinking more. And the last one says, I built a tall, tall tower. And effective feedback would be, great job. Remember, we learned about that a little bit earlier in the beginning. We don't want to give these empty compliments. So instead, the teacher might say, show me how to build a tower like yours. This gets the child maybe modeling their steps or telling the different stages that the child had to go through. So when we think about prompting thought processes, we're trying to give children time to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it. When they express the reasons behind their actions and comments, new opportunities to expand happen. So more examples would be just like you see on the image below, before you. Wow, I see that you put the beads on the string. You put red, then blue, then red, then blue. So tell me more. Tell me more about that. Or you said that the number 4 rhymes with door. How could you tell? These are all opportunities where you can get the child to expand on their thinking. So we have one more right now of the name that behavior marker actually. And when we're thinking about the prompting thought processes, it falls under, is it either when you question responses and actions, or when you ask students to explain their thinking? So it's those two indicators. And before you is the statement, Miss Kelly asks children to identify objects as preparation for a guessing game. When she holds up a Lego figure in a blue uniform, Jonah says, "He's a pilot." And Miss Kelly says, "How do you know he's a pilot?" Do you think the teacher is questioning the response or the action that the child gave? Or do you think the teacher is having the child explain their thinking? Okay, and I see that some people are writing in. And sometimes these answers too can be a little bit interchangeable or very similar to one another, right? The major thing that you want to take away from prompting thought processes is just to get the child to tell you more, to explain their thinking, to really dig deeper. So the answer that is, the answer that fits best for this is when you question the responses and actions. Because remember, the response that the child gave was, "He's a pilot." So the teacher said, "How do you know that he's a pilot?" This is the response the child gave, and now the teacher's having that child question it. How do you know? How do you know that your answer is correct? Tell me. And then the second one says, Jonah says, "Because he has an airplane on his hat." And Miss Kelly asks, "Well, why would a pilot have an airplane on his hat? Pilots fly airplanes." In this statement, is she having the student question their response or actions, or is she having the student explain their thinking? Right? I see a lot of explaining their thinking, explaining their thinking. Awesome. And someone said both. And like I said, sometimes these can still be a bit interchangeable. What we just want to do is make sure we're asking a lot of those open-ended questions. And we were definitely correct to say that the teacher here is asking the child to explain their thinking. Why would a pilot have an airplane on his hat? Okay, so and another poll we have before you, and it states, why is it important to ask children to explain their thinking? Why do you think that's important? Do we want to understand how they came up with their ideas? Do we want to use this as an opportunity to prevent misbehaviors in the classroom? Or do we want to just annoy them with way too many questions? Awesome. All right, and for the sake of time, we're gonna close this poll a little bit earlier to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's time and that we finish. All right, so I'll give it about another 10 seconds. And I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share that with you all. And 95% of you said to understand how they came up with their ideas. 3% of you said to prevent misbehaviors in the classroom. Remember, this isn't to do with misbehaviors or behavior management issues, but more to get children to have a better understanding of their thinking. And I think maybe 3% of you just thought this choice was too funny not to respond to. But no, we do not want to annoy our students with asking them too many questions. All right. And you should be able to continue on there.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. So the next and fourth indicator in quality of feedback, it's providing information. So what's providing information? is the teacher efforts to expand on child's understanding or actions by providing additional information or clarifying a response. With this indicator, the teacher is providing feedback to children, and then this indicator includes three behavior markers: expansion, clarification, and specific feedback. Providing information refers to when the teacher adds information to expand on children's responses when they show understanding, when the teacher provides clarification when children's responses don't show strong understanding, when the teacher provides clarification when children's responses or done. Let's see how the providing information look like in the scenario on the next slide. During the activity in Science Center, Susie looks at the decaying pumpkin and says, "There is fuzzy black hair growing on the pumpkin." The teacher says, "Yes, something is growing on the pumpkin." So as you can see here, the teacher is providing specific feedback to child but saying, "Yes, something is growing on the pumpkin." The teacher continued, "The fuzzy black stuff is mold growing on it." And this is the example when the teacher providing clarification. So she's clarifying what is this black stuff growing on the pumpkin. And then the teacher added furthermore, "The pumpkin was sitting on the wet ground and began to rot and then grow the mold." And here is an example when the teacher expanded on it. So by saying that the pumpkin was on the wet ground and start rot and then mold start growing on it. So with that feedback, the teacher is not only introducing possible new vocabulary, but also explaining the process of how the mold appeared on the pumpkin. Let's look at another scenario on the next slide. And we here have example of expansion and how the interaction may look like between a child and adult. And child says, "It's hot." The teacher responds, "The sun is shining on the slide today, making it hot when you touch it." The teacher provides in here additional information to the child to expand on what they already know. Now, when we move to an example of clarification, when teacher says, "Did you ride a yellow bus?" Child responds, "A big bus." Teacher says, "The bus you rode is big and yellow. Big its size and yellow it is its color." The teacher again provides additional information here and helps to put the child's thoughts in a more complete sentence structure. When we go to specific feedback in this example, the child says, "I built a big, great castle." When teacher responds, "You work very hard and took your time stacking the blocks for your castle. Great job." The teacher was being intentional and gave a detailed response to your child and acknowledged. Okay, so it's time for another round of name that behavior markers. Let's identify the behavior markers that make up providing information, which are specific feedback, clarification, and expansion. So as I read the slide, think about which sentence is an example of each behavioral marker. You can just think of it, or like you did previously with Debra, you can write it down in the question box. So Johnny looks at his fingers and says, "My fingers are stuck together." The teacher says, "Yes, there is glue on your fingers." What do you think? Is that specific feedback, clarification, or expansion? Let me see what you write in here. Okay. A lot of you write specific feedback. That's right. When the teacher says, "Yes, there is a glue on your finger," that's when the teacher gives a specific feedback. Then teacher adds, "When the glue dries up, it makes your fingers sticky." What do you think that was? Specific feedback, clarification, or expansion? Mm-hmm. A lot of you read clarification. That's right. When she explained to a child, when the glue dries up on your fingers, it makes them stick. So she clarified on that. When you glue the pieces of paper to your art project, the glue dried up and your fingers are sticky, but we can wash it off. What did you think? What kind of behavior marker was in here? Example of specific feedback, clarification, or expansion? Expansion, excellent. When the teacher said and explained and expanded by saying, when you glue the pieces of paper to your art project, the glue dried up and your fingers are sticky, but we can wash it off. Very nice. So thank you guys for being interacting with me here. And then it's time for another poll. So please take a moment and think of, when can the teacher provide meaningful information? And some of the choices are, we're going to pull up the poll now. When can the teacher provide meaningful information? During a small group activities at the centers? Only during the planned activities and lessons? Or across the day? All right, so we give you guys 2 minutes. Oh, you guys voting fast now. 40% already. Thank you. 50%. We're getting there. All right. 60%. Okay, so we're going to close the poll. And if you choose across the day, there you go, 90%. You're absolutely right. There should be many meaningful conversation and teachable moments throughout the day, either if it's during arrival, activities in the centers, daily routines and transitions, or playground time, or during the meal time. So across the day, throughout the day, you have many opportunities. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now we're going to talk about the next and fifth and last indicator in quality of feedback, which is encouragement and affirmation. When teachers point out and recognize children's specific efforts, they encourage continued participation. That means teachers are reinforcing what children are doing well and encouraging them to keep going. Here is an example. If a child struggling to complete a matching game, and the teacher says, "You've worked so hard on this, matching the shapes together. Just 2 more to go and you have all this whole thing done." She's specifically recognizing and reinforcing what the child's already done. She said, "Work hard, match shapes," and then she's encouraging him to continue. Not effective example would be here if she said, "I like that, nice job," and walked away. So remember that encouragement and affirmation refers to your recognition of children's effort, the reinforcement of you to offer to encourage child to persist, and children's persistence in their activities. So encouragement and affirmation can really strengthen the relationship between a teacher and student as that child becomes comfortable in sharing his or her thoughts and isn't afraid of voicing their opinion. They know that they won't be mocked or ridiculed if they get an answer wrong. When given feedback, it should be to increase understanding, increase effort, get children to persist, get children to try a new strategy, get children to return to the same problem later and continue working, not to criticize them. So, encouragement and affirmation examples on the next slide. In this scenario here, the teacher initially proposes sorting the tiles by height, but when Jack begins sorting them by number, she reinforces him saying, "Oh, you putting them in order, excellent." The teacher recognized Jack's effort. The teacher reinforced Jack's effort by saying, "Excellent, good job, Jack. You know your numbers really, really well. Now, since you know your numbers so well, why don't you try just put the tiles by size or height? Would you like to do that?" Jack said, "Okay." And that is the student persistent example. Okay, so next we have name that behavior marker again. So now we're going to try to identify the behavior markers to make up for encouragement and affirmation, which are the recognition, reinforcement, and student persistent. So again, as I read the slide, think about which sentence is an example of each behavioral marker. And again, you can think it to yourself or write it down in the question box. Mrs. Johnson asked the children to find the first letter in their names on the alphabet board. When Ingrid points to D, Mrs. Johnson says, "Wow, Ingrid, you found the last letter on your name." So what do you think? Which behavioral marker is an example in this sentence? Is it recognition? Is it reinforcement? Or is it student persistent? Okay, let's see. Yes, it's recognition. Bravo, guys. By saying, "Wow, Ingrid, you found the last letter in your name," teacher provide the recognition for the child's effort. And what about, you know that you have an D in your name? Which behavioral marker here? Recognition, reinforcement, or student persistent? You know that you have an D in your name. That was reinforcement, yes. And when she said, "Now, what letter is at the beginning of your name?" Ingrid continues to search the board and then point on I. Which behavioral marker did you recognize in this? Recognition, reinforcement, or student persistence? Yes, thank you for typing. Student persistent, because when the teacher said, "Now, what letter is at the beginning of your name?" teacher encouraged child to keep going. So Ingrid continues to search on the alphabet board, and then she's pointing to letter I, and that's student persistent. Thank you, guys. So next, we have another poll for you. So please take a moment again and tell us which is more effective form of encouragement and affirmation. And the choices will be, we're going to pull out the poll now. Teacher acknowledging and encouraging children's effort, or teacher praising children's work by saying, "Nice job." So let me give you 2 minutes. Okay, almost 50%. Okay, let's close the poll and see what are the responses. That's right, you got it. By acknowledging and encouraging children's effort, you motivate them to strive and also help them with their self-esteem. Okay, thank you guys for sharing. So next, after we went through all the quality of feedback indicators, which was scaffolding, feedback loops, prompting through thought processes, providing information, encouragement and affirmation, let's see how could we apply this in everyday classroom routines. So the next few slides we prepared, there will be some examples and ideas for you to apply in your own classrooms in order to help you to improve in giving more effective feedback to your children while they are busy working in the learning centers. So when you're walking around the classroom and checking on children in each learning center, remember to engage in conversation with children in all learning centers. Ask lots of open-ended questions and follow-up questions. Give lots of specific feedback. Encourage children to keep trying in their work. And remember that some of the most effective feedback occurs when teachers ask a series of follow-up questions that help the children reach deeper understanding. After a child responds, ask another question of him or her or the whole class. Keep this conversation going, feedback loops. Remember, Deborah was talking about that. Going until you are sure that children really understand what you are trying to teach. Give lots of specific feedback. Tell them what they did right and why. Always be on the lookout for opportunities to provide feedback to children. Walk around the classroom when children are walking independently and working independently. Take the time to listen and respond to thoughtful way to what children have to say during the small group activities and sessions. Encourage children to keep trying in their work. Recognize and acknowledge children's effort and encourage them to persist by using specific feedback again. For example, you might say to children who are working on a large floor puzzle, I see how hard you guys working on that big puzzle. With teamwork, I know you guys will be able to do it. Call me over if you need any help. This kind of positive recognition encourages children to keep working on difficult tasks and try new strategies. So on the next slide, you're going to see an example of Math Center open-ended questions. So remember earlier, Deborah, again, was talking about feedback loops and back and forth exchanges. So in order to engage in conversations with children in the learning center, ask a lot of open-ended questions, follow-up questions. We must know what kind of question we have to ask. So to help you to remember and to ask the questions and what sort of questions, we given you example here of some open-ended question that you can actually post them in the learning centers, in each learning centers. And then also while you're given a lots of specific feedback while interacting with children in the centers, you encourage them to keep trying in their work new strategies during the activities. We would like to provide you with those specific open-ended questions so you can post them in each learning center, and when you get there you can see them. They are in your eye level and you're like, oh wow, I have to ask them some question. I have to keep that back and forth exchanges, keep that conversation going with my children. So in here you might ask how this circle is different than this circle, and all kinds of different questions when it comes to math. And math center have different questions because they are more deepened to help with cognitive skills for concept development, so classifying, comparing, which was covered by Amy and Tiffany in previous webinars. So let's move on. Next examples are examples for Art Center. And remember, open-ended questions open up the conversations with your child. You don't stop. You open up the conversation to going. So some of the examples of closed and open-ended question will be like, what color is this? Versus you used a lot of blue on your painting. You might want to open the conversation by adding, what does it remind you of? Or how many teddy bears are on the block? The child can only say that much, but you could open up the conversation by saying, what are those teddy bears thinking about? What is your doll name? That's a closed question. Why don't you ask, Your baby is so beautiful. Tell me about her. On the next slide, there's another example of what you can put in dramatic play center. And let's go to another slide. In block center, the same thing. And remember that when you put that little description of what the children will learn in the centers, that will give you an idea what developmental areas children will work on, and will also help you with child assessment and in the individual's lesson planning, but that's another separate training. And then in the next slide, we have examples of library center. Tell the children what they will learn in the library center. For example, they're going to learn a love for book, developing a love to books, how to take care of books. And then during the story time, ask some of those questions that are here presented at the slide. Like, what do you think the story is about? What are some clues? What is the story about? What's going to happen next? What do you think? So that's we hope that's going to help you a little bit, give you some more ideas and strategies. On the next slide, we have some examples of some more open-ended questions for science and math, cognitive thinking skills. Remember to talk to children throughout all their activities. Keep pulling informations from them all day long. It's going to help you to enhance your skills in concept development, quality of feedback, and also in language modeling, which you're going to learn next week in whole instructional domain. And most of all, it benefits kids and their outcomes, which is our ultimate goal as a professional in preschools. So, how would you sum up the whole quality of feedback? Imagine you have a new teacher starting at your school, and she has only brief understanding of class. In the question box, take a minute and describe in a few words how would you explain quality of feedback to her. Take a moment and type it out, or just think to yourself. How would you explain what quality of feedback to your new teacher, new coworker in your classroom? I think some responses, I see some responses here. Thank you so much, guys. Talking to children a lot, giving them praise, and giving some information. Awesome. Somebody asked me, can we send this to you? Of course, just email to us. We're going to give you our information at the last slide, and I can email those examples of those open-ended questions for each learning center to you. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back to my co-presenter, Deborah. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. So when we look at the complete picture of quality of feedback, what we really want you all to know is that the whole purpose should be to increase understanding. We want children to have a better understanding of the information being presented and to make sure that those comprehension skills are there. We also want to increase their effort. We want them to be persistent and to try different strategies. We want to make sure our students continue trying and that they're excited to be doing so. And we want to get children to return to the same problem later and continue working. So it's important that we create that type of safe space where students feel comfortable to make mistakes and to share their thoughts with us. So the big takeaway is that, simply make it count. And when you're having these conversations, remember that good job is not enough. Effective feedback provides children with specific information and encouragement that helps them reach a deeper level of understanding that they would not be able to get on their own. So be mindful and be intentional.
Okay, go on.
Okay, and then we just have some of our references really quickly that we wanted to share with you. Those of you who are familiar with class, these are different strategies or dimensions that we use and guides that we use. just in case, this slide is here again, in case anyone needs access to the different handouts that we had today, as well as information that you saw earlier. And I'll present with you this slide, which is our information. I know that someone mentioned that there were particular questions that you wanted. So if you reach out to us, we will be able and happy to provide that information to you. And quickly, before we let you all go today, something that we wanted to do as well was we wanted to show you some additional resources that are located on the ELC website. So the first thing you have to do is you will log on to our ELC website, which is www.elcbroward.org. After you're able to do that, we want you to click on Providers. It is on the left-hand screen. Also on that page, you will see and notice that we have the Doc Parent Portal. Now, this is a really fabulous portal that we have. It's the ELC. We decided to partnership with Doc Preschool, and it's a terrific resource. So there are daily activities actually for ages 2, 3, and 4, and there's as well as videos and weekly messages posted. So when you click on this, first you were able to click on providers, then you will click on provider training videos. And when you do that, you will have access to all of the different webinars we have been teaching since, I believe, early April. We do want to inform you, though, that these are not considered in-service hours, or there are no opportunities for certificates, as they all have to be live trainings. There are as well some trainings on the website that are in Spanish, in case anyone has interest in hearing them in another language. So we just also wanted to tell you to stay tuned, because next week it's the third part of this webinar, and it is Let's Talk Conversations Throughout the Day in the Preschool Classroom. And then 2 of our co-workers will be presenting this, and this is next week, Thursday at 1 p.m. And we also have a really extremely busy calendar for the month of June, so you can make sure that you log on to the ELC website and register for that. There are some classes in Spanish as well as some evening courses available.
And before we let you go, we would like to thank you for all you do for the children and families in our county. And remember, you guys are essential. You are greatly appreciated. We thank you for everything, not only when it's Appreciation Day, but all around the year. Thank you for everything you do for us and for the children. So that will be all. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for My Turn, Your Turn Building on Quality of Feedback in Classroom webinar. We hope you enjoyed it as much we did. Bye.
And what I'm actually going to do, if anyone's still on, I know there were a few people that wanted to get the questions that were available, so I'll leave some of these up in case anyone wants to do a screenshot. But if not, you can email us individually for those questions.